So we'll do the start. So I just want to welcome everybody to the R for Data Science book club. Today we are going to do chapter 24, web scraping. Jon Harmon, the executive director of the DSLC, has graciously reached out to me and said he wanted to lead our session today. Um, as I was reviewing the chapter, there are no exercises. So, Jon, to give you a little background, our group made the decision probably several weeks ago to make the transition of like not just going through the concepts, but doing exercises. But obviously, this chapter doesn't have exercises. So, we're excited to see what you have today. So, feel welcome to cover the concepts and stuff. And so, yeah, I'm really excited. Jon is, I've had the opportunity to meet Jon several times, and he's very knowledgeable, expert level R user. And so I'm very excited for him to lead us today in the conversation of web scraping. So I'm just going to turn it over to you, Jon.
Okay, thank you very much. I will start with what is already published in the shared slides. I do have a fix for a couple of the pages in the process of building right now, so we will switch to those once it is ready. And I'm trying to get my controls all set up so that I can see the chat in case anyone has questions. Let's see. All right. All right, so today we're going to be talking about chapter 24 on web scraping. And hopefully by the time you've read this chapter or watched this video, you'll be able to decide whether to scrape data from a web page. You'll be able to recognize enough HTML to find your way around a web page when you're scraping it. You'll be able to extract tables from web pages, and you'll be able to extract some other data from web pages. And I don't have it as a learning objective, but there are some links to help you kind of expand on what you learn in the book or to apply what's in the book. All right. And we're going to be using rvest, which is within the tidyverse. So the first thing to think about when you're scraping, at least a little bit, is ethics and legalities. He has a quote in the book. If the data isn't public, non-personal, or factual, or you're scraping the data specifically to make money with it, and that's the most important one, you'll want to talk to a lawyer. So if you're doing something, for the most part, if maybe you shouldn't be doing it. There is this package Polite that I reference in here. It's a little bit out of date, but if you're like going to be doing some really heavy scraping, it basically automatically checks some of the policies of the site you're going to be scraping and like provides or helps you provide like information, contact information, so that if they decide, hey, don't do that, like if you're, yes, it allows them to tell you no, which could lead to a whole headache, but it also sets up a friendly situation from the start. So it's a good way to, make sure you're not making a mess of things. It's good to check terms of service of whatever you're looking at. It's good to avoid personally identifiable information that can get you into like legal issues, depending on what you're doing with it. But the kind of, counterpoint to all that is that for the most part, facts aren't copyrightable. That's why if you read like a recipe blog, it'll have, a story about when they first found the recipe or whatever, because that story you can copyright, but the recipe itself is just a fact. You can't copyright the recipe. And so, that protects you in a lot of cases. If you're just trying to get like information about, we're going to look at, assuming that this rebuilds, we're going to look at some World's Fair data from Wikipedia. It's on Wikipedia and it's licensed for use, but it's also just facts. So you're fine scraping something like that. All right. And if you see me like looking over to the side, that's where everybody is, both visuals of your faces and the chat. So that's why I keep glancing over there. All right. Some little bit on typical HTML structure. And sorry, the rebuild just finished, so I am going to switch to that. Go. All right. I haven't actually looked to make sure everything worked right in this, so this could be fun, but it seems to have. All right. So HTML, it's hypertext markup language. It's the language that the web is in. Notice that this slide is an HTML file. It's a hierarchical structure, and it's made up of elements where you have like a tag name, maybe some attributes, and then content. And if we look at this, like the start tag has these open bracket, close bracket. Inside of that tag, you can have these attributes that are named values. You can have content inside of the tag, and then you have an end tag with the slash. And then elements nest inside elements as content. So, and you call those nested elements children. And so, like, we can just look at. I need to make sure that this is showing. Yes. All right. In Chrome, if you type like Control-Shift-I or Command-Shift-I, it'll load up or it'll bring up the developer tools. Very useful when you're scraping, because it kind of lets you see what you will see when you try to read it in. This is, this page, and so you can see this HTML element. It has some named attributes that don't have values. This just has these, they just have the names. It has a head, which we're not going to worry about, a body. And again, in HTML tools, it's really nice because you can kind of see what are you looking at just through that highlight. And so like, okay, the summary is the collapse part probably, but within this body, we have all these things, and you can kind of drill down into what you're trying to look at, or you can right click and inspect something to jump to that piece. Very, very useful when you are trying to scrape websites. And so you can see like there's this H2 tag, which is the title of the slide. It has a class, which we're going to talk about in a second. And you can just see all the different little attributes and tags. All right. So the rvest package, it took me a long time to realize why the heck is it called rvest? It's because Hadley Wickham is from New Zealand. And so that's the harvest package. Like that is how he says the word harvest. And then it starts with R, and it's 5 letters, which is a thing that he was trying to do with all his packages for a while there. So it's the package for like built around scraping web pages. It just fairly recently had a pretty major update, technically after the book came out, so I don't think it talks about all of it. Oh, so yeah, there's a question in the chat from Colin about making inspect horizontal instead of vertical, and it is somewhere in here. Yeah, it's not there, but there's a, I never remember. It's like it's a setting somewhere of probably that. So that's not doing it. Anyway, it's somewhere in there. In the settings of the toolbar. I will try to pull that up. Oh, there it is, dockside. So if you go to the little hammer or whatever kebab menu, you can move it around. It can be helpful depending on what you're trying to look at. Like I do a lot in the console, and which is like a JavaScript console. I like having it wide, but then sometimes if you're just navigating, having it over on the right is nice. All right. So, all right. So yeah, rvest. The first main function you want out of there is read HTML. That lets you like read the page. Something I'm going to show in a second is generally I try to do that like once and then do all the processing of that page so that you're not hitting the website over and over, especially if I'm like doing a lot of experimentation to try to get the data out of it. And then like usually what I'll end up, well, it depends what I'm doing, but a lot of times if you're doing like a programmatic scraping of web pages, you're going to be loading like a bunch of pages automatically in a row, and that's when you start to get in trouble if you're doing it too fast and like slamming their server. But all right, so we read HTML, and then the first thing we're going to look at is they have a shortcut in there, just HTML table, which kind of wraps a whole bunch of RVest functionality to just find tables that are on the page and scrape them. Um, a lot of times that's enough. That's all you need because you're like, oh, there's this cool table on this website. Let me pull it into R, and you can just use HTML table to do that in theory. So yes, good. We have an example of that. It's like I wasn't sure. Yes. Okay, good. I hadn't actually looked at the rendered version of this yet. So uh, Wikipedia has this list of world expositions article. This was, or it's in the World's Fair article, and it has a list within that article. We used this in a Tidy Tuesday, I think towards the end of last year, something like that. And so I went through and found one where I focused on this one, but I just found the most recent one that was relatively straightforward where we did this. So, um, and so, yeah, Wikipedia has this table. In theory, you could select and copy paste, but then you like can get weird formatting when you do that. And you don't have as much fine grained control over how you manipulate it from there. And so the first iteration is this HTML read HTML and then HTML table. And you'll see the result here. So this is just loading this URL, which is funny that it redirects. I didn't remember that or realize that. And it loads actually, I think it's 7. I don't know. It's a whole bunch of tables that it finds. 9. So it finds 9 tables. And so that's like the first step of when you're working with just, if you just go straight to HTML table, you're going to get a list of the tables. Even if there's only one table, it's going to be a list of one table. And so you need to then subset and get the one that you want. And so a way that you can kind of clean from there. There is this function in rvest HTML element that returns the same number of outputs as inputs. So for right now, that's just going to be one thing because we're putting one, read HTML, one object into it, then we would get one object out. And then within that, you can put just like if you just put a word, that would be, let's say, for example, if I just did the word div, it would get the first div tag. If I do dot thing, that is looking at class. So if I did dot book, it would get this, or dot without hyphen animation, or both of those to get this exact thing. Or you could do div dot book to kind of focus in and get this. And then I don't know if we have this div ID mathjax message. So hashtag or pound sign and then mathjax message would get this specific thing that has this ID. These two are extremely useful when you're trying to get specific things out of a web page. Like this is what you would you'll end up having to use most of the time. Well, if things are well structured. I think we have a little bit of an example where you have to go, okay, well, I want the first div is going to have, this piece of information. And then within the second div, I need the third paragraph. And so there are things that you can do to kind of sort that out, but we'll see that in a moment. All right, so that's the basics. So just one example is I do table.wiki table. So if I look over at this, oops, let's just do inspect, or rather there. and we can see that this is a table and it has class wiki table. And that happens to be enough that the first element that has table.wiki table on this page did not print, but it did locally. So I'll have to fix that. But it was, I'll have to play around and see why it didn't get it. But it's the first of these tables. Maybe I aimed wrong and got the wrong table. So it didn't print right. Oh, actually, I'll bet I don't execute this. That's what it is. There was a bug on here before, and so the code wasn't executing. So I will fix that and resubmit it. But what it would get is this. So turns out that that's the first one. Anyway, so really we could just do table. It happens to be the first one, but I did the dot to like make sure we're focusing on the right kind of table. Is it making sense so far? Everyone seems to be mostly nodding along, so I think we're good. All right. I hope, I got like running back over to my desk to get on here, so I hope I'm not going too fast. I got in that mode. All right, so the next thing that you might need to do or want to do is there's HTML elements with an S, and that finds all matches for whatever you put in the text. A rule of thumb of how you use these is you'll use HTML elements with an S to get rows, to get observations for whatever you're trying to select. And then within that set, you'll use HTML element to get variables for each observation. So that takes us back to when I said it returns the same number of outputs as inputs. And so if you are running HTML elements and you get 5 tables or 9 tables, and then you do HTML element within it, it's going to get that thing, whatever you select, within each of those 9 tables. So maybe you'll get the first header within each one. All right, and so we'll see an example of that. Or before we see an example of that, there are a few other functions that you'll often use. There's HTML text. You almost never want this. Like if you want to know that text has italic markers or different styles on the text, then you use HTML text because it gets it raw and it doesn't do any processing on it. But HTML text 2 takes the text and gets rid of all the extra crap. I think it also processes the escaped HTML characters. So if you've got like an ampersand, it'll turn it into just an ampersand symbol, not the HTML to generate that. And so it does some cleanup on the text. Most of the time, this is what you want, depending what you're doing with the data. And then HTML ATTR is to get an attribute value. So for example, here, if we were really working with this, we might get this, select the A and get the href attribute to get the URL that it's pointing to. And it, I say, for example, to get the href, that I would guess like 90% of the time, if I'm doing HTML ATTR, I'm getting the URL that something is pointing to. All right, so on the rvest website, package site, he has an article intentionally set up to scrape, and so it has some of that same actual starting stuff, and then it's there's like an h2 with an ID of the Phantom Menace, and it's there are different sections and different pieces. So we'll look at how we can scrape this. So yeah, we've got all these different things that are section tags, and if I scroll down a little bit, we can see, oops, that Revenge of the Sith is also within a section tag. You can see there are other section tags, and actually we can see that all of these are section tags. And so we'll HTML elements to grab the section and see that there are 7 sections, each of which have the same general structure. And so, sorry, this is like when you do an HTML elements, anything within RVest, until you get down to like the last thing that you're extracting, it's this special XML node set type of object. And so that is basically a kind of list. And so it's a list of these 7 sections. And so each section is the element that one of the elements that we selected. And we can take a section or all of the sections and do HTML element, which gets one result per how many, per element of that list that's coming in. And we're going to get the thing that has class director. And so again, if we go over here into one of these sections and look at director, there's a span with class director. So that's what we're going to pull out, the thing that has dot director, class director. And that's what all of these are. It pulled out the 7 results with the 7 movies. And again, then HTML text to just pull the text out. I am guessing that HTML text, just HTML text 1 would have been fine. I don't think any of these directors have any weird special characters or any formatting or anything like that. I'm trying to skip, no, maybe. So yeah, there's nothing hidden in there. So would have been fine to do HTML text without the 2, but for the most part, I do HTML text 2 unless I have a reason to do HTML text without the 2, which is, I don't know, unfortunate naming. He should have called it like HTML text and HTML text raw or something like that. But, all right. And then, so this is something I do all the time when I'm compiling Tidy Tuesdays is, okay, I've got that section. And so I'll do some code to find the list of sections. And then within each of those, scrape out something. So if we look within each section, there's an element H2, and the text inside of that is the title. So if we look at this one, the first H2, and there's only one H2, but even if there were multiple, it's only going to get the first one from each element. And The Force Awakens is inside of that. There's also like the first P inside of each one is the release date. And so we're going to grab that first one and call it the release date. And we're going to get rid of this extra text that's at the beginning. And then actually, even we can use readr. There's the parse date function. So that'll turn this into a nice, pretty date object. Director, like we looked at, we're just going to pull out that one element that has class director. That'll clean that up. And then the intro, there's the opening crawl in each of these. Oops. And so, if we look at this, div class equals crawl. This is a good example of how HTML text 2 works. That we'll see that Return of the Jedi has 3 paragraphs of text in its crawl, but HTML text 2 is just going to put those all together and put a /n between them, because that's how it displays that it is just 3 paragraphs of text. I doubt we can actually see that here, but that's an example. Right, what else do we have in here? And so that is RVest in a nutshell. Like, you can't really, you have to just sit down and play with it to really learn it. Find a web page that you want to get stuff out of and dig in. A lot of times you'll end up doing some cleanup inside of R after I would say, like, I recommend scraping too much and then rolling it down with readr over scraping too little. But if you can focus in, it's, it can be really handy and relatively easy. Where this is most useful is, I should have grabbed some of these links, but we have some Tidy Tuesdays where like the first page is a list of It was like World Chess Championships or something, and it has, like year, host country, blah blah blah, all these things, and then a link that is the results from that year. And so you scrape that table, you get all those links, and then use those to like scrape each of those to get the table from that year. Um, that's something that is super common, where or there will be an index that has the list of all the links. And then, I would say when you're doing that, do one of those manually, get it working, get this all set up, and then just set up a function that you call to do all the rest of the pages. Um, and I meant, actually, that was the other thing I was going to put in here is, um, I should add that link. I might do that before I go, or before I close this. But within Tidy Tuesday, if you're not familiar, we do a project where each week we release a data set that's clean and ready to play with. And it's probably not shocking to hear that a lot of these are scraped off of websites. And so, like this one was the one I did relatively recently, which was CDC data sets that were being archived on archive.org. And within each of these, we have a cleaning script, so you can see how we did it. This uses a piece that isn't talked about in the book. RVest has this read HTML live function, which is like read HTML, except it, some websites are like kind of live generated. If we look at that, okay. Like this looks like a normal website. And if we inspect it like as a human clicking at it, yeah, it's just a table. Okay, that's easy. But if you load it with just read HTML, it's going to get the code that generates this page instead of the generated page. And so read HTML live gets the actual generated page. You can also like send commands into it to like click something and then scrape the table that results or things like that. And so anyway, but the point of all that is, number one, we do that a lot. We we'll scrape things, and if you find something interesting to scrape, um, so it depends. Stefan or Stefan, I think, asked, would that apply to any websites that are not static? It depends how they're not static. Like if it changes, like if you have to log into it or if it's using something about you, it pretty certainly would need read HTML live. But it might also just like update daily and generate a new website or update hourly or whatever. And so it's not static, but it acts like a static website at that point. The best way to find out, I always start with read HTML and just kind of print the result, and you'll be able to see usually like this has like one line that is a script block. It doesn't have any of the formatting or anything. And so that can usually get you started to kind of explore. If if you're looking at this and you're like, okay, I'm going to grab the thing with ID main content, so hash main content, and you do that and you get no results. Yeah, okay. You probably want to do read HTML live because that thing doesn't exist until you actually like load the page. But so if you ever do this, we do have within Tidy Tuesday that you can submit a dataset pull request. We have instructions within the repo of how to do that. And the thing that I'm going to link within the thing is that within Tidy Tuesday R, the R package for working with Tidy Tuesday, the dev version has it has functions for curating a data set. So if you ever like find yourself scraping some cool data set from the web, we would very much appreciate if you then submit that to Tidy Tuesday and share it and let people use it. So this again, well, I can go over it if people have questions. I do have to make sure I am out of here before one, but it's just, you know, something to do with that. And like if you find yourself just kind of scraping some random things to practice, that sounds like a great thing to curate and submit as a data set. So I would very much appreciate that. And it's a good way to like get some experience with GitHub if you haven't worked with GitHub. All right, let's see. Was there anything else that we wanted to go over? Oh, so um yeah, so Arvest has this article about selector gadget. It is a piece of JavaScript that you can copy to your bookmark bar, and then when you run it, it like lets you select things, and it'll tell you, well, okay, this is going to get all the things that are green or yellow, but if I click this again, I only want that first one. Oh, actually, that won't work. So it says there's no way to do that. But like if I do that link and that link, it's going to like compile what I need to put in as the selector to get these pieces. But if I don't want that, okay, yeah, it does. You know, it'll give me what I need. I will tell you that, like, a lot of times it kind of works, or you'll have to refine it from here. But it's a good way to kind of get started to see, oh, what would I need to do to get just these lines and not, you know, not this library. And so it's going to give you the kind of the text that you would put in to HTML elements in order to select these things. Um, if you are doing a lot of web scraping, I highly recommend going through this CSS Diner. It is a site that someone put together that basically teaches you CSS. And so it's a game, and it'll tell you, okay, type the selector in order to select, let's see, elements of their type. Oh, or sorry. So this is the example or the description of how the selector works. And then here it's saying select the plates. And so um, somewhere, I haven't done this in a while, but anyway, I don't want to do it on the fly and screw it all up. But you you know, it does tell you how to do it. But you can type in a CSS selector. And so like if I want to say plate, yeah, there we go. So I got the plates. And now it's saying, okay, I have to select the bento boxes, and those are tag bento. So okay. And that worked. But then it's going to get more complicated. And so I need like plate that is ID fancy. And so I can type hash fancy to get that. And these CSS selectors, I guess, to, you know, close the loop, is that's what you're putting into HTML element, or HTML elements are this type of thing. So the apple that's on the plate is just plate apple, I think should do it. Yeah. And so it's a good website to teach yourself how to do this. It does actually explain it. I'm obviously oh, and yes, so I'm flying through this. The other reason that this is useful is it's very helpful if you are styling HTML with CSS for Quarto or Shiny. It's also very useful for if you're working with JavaScript / if you're writing some like fancy Shiny apps. Being able to find elements on the page is really useful for that. And so this is useful. And so I forgot that it has a little bit of a like selector gadget of its own, except it's like a visual one that you can use to try to find, okay, this is what I'm trying to select. So anyway, Mozilla Developer Network, MDN, has like all kinds of really great just guides on anything that's on the web, and they have one on CSS selectors, so that this walks you through like the fine details, everything about how CSS selectors are defined, and gets into some of the really fancy things that actually CSS Diner also gets into. Some of the things in here don't work with Arvest. So you'll find that kind of trial and error as you go. There are some selectors that are almost like functions, like this has, I can't remember if that works in RVest. So some of the fancier ones won't work, but you kind of find that as you go. And well, also, I think in the docs for RVest, he walks through what doesn't work. And then, the reason that I'm here is to promote this thing that hopefully someday I'll actually work on a little bit more. So I am writing a book about working with web APIs with R. I ran a book club, started about a little over a year ago, and then we went through the whole book that I wrote as we were working on through the club. And then I plan to soon kind of go back through and do another iteration, but these all have slide decks with some to-dos in there for myself, but that you can kind of see some more details about how to work with APIs. So that is another resource that's available if you're going beyond what you can do with RVest, basically, if you want to actually hit an API to API being like a thing on the internet that you can send commands to do something. And it's what the internet's built out of, basically. So yeah, that is everything. So yeah, Colin pointed out currently in the Quarto styling mode. Yeah, that I'm just starting to play with Grand.yaml, their new fancy way to style everything. Which is exciting, but it doesn't necessarily cover everything, but it gets you at least the baseline. And I have not played with typist or whatever, however you're supposed to pronounce that yet. Anyone have any questions, comments, thoughts?
No, I was playing. I just wanted to say, like, yeah, playing around with the CSS stuff with Corto a little bit and types. So it's good to kind of have a little bit of CSS background. I don't have a heavy background in that area, so it definitely comes up outside of just web scraping. So it's certainly good to go through some of those materials because they do come up again.
Yeah, it's a thing that um, comes up in a lot of places. If you're trying to make things look nice, you're going to end up in CSS. And then also, if you're just like trying to make interactive things, a lot of times you end up using CSS selectors to do that. And so it comes up a lot.
And then too, I think I've used like in the past when I've used RBest using like XPath, that's a CSS concept, right? Or something like that, like using the XPath
So,
to
so
captures.
XPath is the other way to do things instead of CSS selectors.
That's it.
I um I was gung ho on XPath is better. Everyone should learn XPath for a while. Um, I think mostly then I learned CSS selectors better and went, okay, you can do like 99% of what you can do in XPath with CSS selectors, and they're easier to write and easier to read. So XPath, I can't remember right now, but it comes from that, this is a type of XML kind of. There was a whole thing where uh, like XML is the superset of HTML. Um,
Mm,
and so XPath is like the walking the path um, through this or this document to find things, and it's I don't know, it's just a different language for traversing that tree. Um, I think XPath has more functions, and so like finding the third of a type of thing is a little bit easier in XPath. That sort of thing, but um, you can also do that in CSS selectors. So If you look at rvest code, let's see if we've got anything handy. Let's just jump over to like HTML elements and HTML elements. You'll see that each of them has, you can either give it CSS or XPath.
Mhm.
If you want to give it XPath, you have to name the argument, but otherwise, oh, and yeah, he does talk about what CSS selectors are supported. I don't know if he even has examples of XPath because almost everyone does everything in CSS selectors. Like CSS selectors kind of one for most types of programming, I think. But it's there. XPath is there in case you want it. If you want to really dive into um, like how that works, there's the package XML2 is what rvest is wrapping for all the selection stuff, and so that package has more fine-grained functions for dealing with things. So do that.
Yeah, I mention it, but I mean, it was somebody who taught it to me one time, and then I was like, oh, great, let's just use XPath. But then because I don't do a lot of web
Yes.
scraping, so it was like one of those things where it was just like somebody showed me, and I was like, oh, this is great, but I never really thought about it, so I probably should you switch over to CS or selectors rather than sticking with XPath. So, but it's
Yeah.
available.
Yes. And then XML2, if you know, depending on what you get into, um, is more for like manipulating the um the tree. So you might read it in and then you want to change something and write it back out or that kind of thing. Um, so XML2 lets you do that. It also has some other things, most of which, like most of the useful things, are in HTML2. He just re-exports or wraps and simplifies, because this is like the more raw manipulation in XML2, and then rvest makes it prettier and easier to work with. So lots of things if you want to keep diving. But I do need to get going and get over to a different meeting. So if you have any questions, I will watch uh, the chat, the Slack channel, and feel free to ask me any questions you might have.
Yeah, John, before you jump off, I really appreciate you taking on today's discussion, and so I really appreciate you doing that.
It was fun.
Yeah, it was great. It's good to see, especially somebody who does this quite a bit, especially with the Tidy Tuesday and all the contributions, and especially big thanks to keeping the community going. And it's great to see you once in a while, and so it's great that you could join us. As just a quick
Thank you.
reminder for everybody that's still here, again, remember we're going to take the 3 week spring break. We will come back on April 3rd, and then we'll do functions. So really appreciate everybody joining in, and I can hang out here if anybody else wants to chat or other than that, that's all I got. So appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, everybody, and I will see you. Uh, I won't type stop yet in case you have any other chatting that you want to do, but make sure to do that.
I will remember because I always fail at doing that, and I make John's life even harder. So
That's the most important one. Start, I can find. Actually,
stop.
it's not true. Start's actually more important because anyway, it makes the editing more of a pain. Usually going too long isn't a big deal. Anyway, all right. I will
All
see
right, see you,
you.
John.
Yep.
Yeah.
Bye.
Cool. So if anybody else has anything else, let me know. If not, we can wrap it up here, and I'll see everybody in 3 weeks. So, um, yeah. Anything else from anybody else?
Does anyone have a lot of experience with CSS selectors? When I play around with Quarto and have been trying to change styling, it has been pretty painful for me. And I always think like, oh, I get CSS selectors, but I don't really grok them. So anyone, I new the Diner website where you can play around with that. Any other advice to help with that process?
Even I didn't have like much experience with CSS actually. So even recently I started using like a few of my project and Shiny application. But yeah, even I feel the same. But I don't know about the CSS Diner application. I can use it right now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
for me it's the same thing. It's to the point where I just keep coming up to to where I need to learn it, because Quarto obviously heavily uses it if you want to style things. I mean, yeah, I'm emphasizing your pain rather than giving you an answer to this, because it's one of those things that I keep coming up to and I'm just limited in my ability to like extend things beyond just the basics, and it seems like it's just something I just need to learn, or at least the foundation stuff.
One thing I had a thought about in general, because it's so fundamental to how the web works, it's really nice to teach it too, right? If you teach reproducible analyses and talk a little bit about Quarto, it's actually worth going also in CSS. And for students, one of the ways to like express or make products would be they make a website or whatever with Quarto, and then having the knowledge, a little bit of knowledge of CSS goes a long way, right? And so I think it's really worth learning. And then also now with the scraping, also a typical task, right, that people encounter all the time. It's kind of a nice synergy to have as teaching content. That's the only other thought I had, like reading this chapter. That's really powerful technology to know about.
Yeah, and then like just like the Quarto presentations, like I've just been messing around with that a lot recently, and it's like having a separate SCSS file is helpful. I don't know if people are familiar with Emil. Emil,
Oh yeah.
he has a lot of really, I'll put his blog in here. He has some really good stuff related to like styling with like Reveal JS and stuff. And if I'm doing work with like Quarto stuff, I usually lean on him and his content, because it's like he's got some really good content about like using different CSS stuff that goes way beyond anything that I would ever do, but it's really interesting stuff. Anything else from the group? I think it was a good conversation. I know we didn't have any exercises for this one, so we kind of bucked a little bit of tradition, but I think with functions, we'll pick up with that again when we get back. So really appreciate everybody joining in. So Matthew, hopefully get to see you next time. And then we'll see everybody in April.
See ya.
All right, see ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Stop.